In the heart of Boston, where dreams often collide with reality, Beverly Davis had mastered the art of wearing a smile while carrying the weight of countless disappointments. The year was 1979, and like many others working at Murphy's Diner, she had learned that some days were just meant to be endured rather than enjoyed. The familiar jingle of the bell above the door had become the soundtrack of her life, each ring marking another chance to make ends meet. Beverly's hands, slightly calloused from years of carrying hot plates and wiping down tables, moved with practiced efficiency as she balanced 3 plates of steaming breakfast specials. That morning had started like any other. The smell of coffee brewing, bacon sizzling on the griddle, and the quiet murmur of early birds seeking their first cup of caffeine. But sometimes the most extraordinary moments come disguised in ordinary packaging. The clock had just struck 7:15 a.m. when he walked in, tall, somewhat gangly, with a quiet demeanor that seemed at odds with his imposing height. Beverly had seen enough basketball players in her day to recognize one when she saw one, but this one was different. There was no entourage, no flashy jewelry, just a simple jacket and a look of someone who preferred to blend in rather than stand out. She approached his table, order pad in hand, reciting the words she had said thousands of times before. "Coffee, to start," the man nodded, his eyes scanning the menu with genuine interest, rather than the dismissive glance she usually received from customers who thought themselves above a simple diner breakfast. What Beverly didn't know then was that this seemingly routine morning would become a story she would tell for years to come. The man at table 7 wasn't just another customer, he was Larry Bird, though his name wouldn't become legendary until later. But at that moment, he was just another patron seeking breakfast in a city that was slowly waking up. As she poured his coffee, Beverly noticed his hands, large workers' hands that spoke of someone who knew the value of hard work. She had seen enough pretenders in her time, athletes who thought their talent made them superior. This one seemed different, almost uncomfortable with the few glances of recognition he received from other patrons. "The special's pretty good today," she offered, more out of habit than expectation. "Though between you and me, the hash browns could use an extra minute on the griddle." He looked up, a hint of appreciation in his eyes for her honesty. "I'll trust your judgment on that," he replied, his voice carrying a soft Indiana drawl that seemed out of place in Boston. As Beverly walked away to place his order, she overheard a conversation at the next table that made her pause. 2 regulars, Timothy Roth and Paul Hansen, were discussing basketball, their voices carrying with the excitement of true fans. "Magic Johnson's changing the game," Timothy was saying, shaking his head in amazement. "Did you see that no-look pass last night? Nobody plays like that, nobody." Paul nodded enthusiastically. "Lakers got themselves a real star. That's the future of basketball right there." Beverly returned to Larry's table with a pot of coffee, noticing how he seemed to be trying not to listen to the conversation behind him. Something about his expression, a mixture of determination and quiet focus, stirred something in her. Maybe it was the way he sat there, alone with his thoughts, while others sang praises of another player. Maybe it was the early morning weariness that sometimes made her forget her usual professional distance. Or maybe it was just fate choosing an unlikely moment to make its move. "You know," she said, refilling his cup without being asked, "they talk about Magic Johnson like he's revolutionizing the game. But sometimes the real revolution happens quietly, without all the flash." She paused, wondering if she was overstepping. "You're Larry Bird, aren't you? I've seen you play for Indiana State." He looked up, surprise flickering across his features. "You follow college basketball?" "My son does. Never misses a game when he can help it." She smiled, thinking of her boy, who dreamed of playing professionally one day. "He says you've got the best court vision he's ever seen." Larry's expression softened slightly, but before he could respond, the conversation from the next table grew louder. "Magic's got that natural talent," Timothy was saying. "That's something you can't teach. You either have it or you don't." Perhaps it was the early hour, or maybe it was the accumulation of all the doubts she had seen in her own life, but something made Beverly speak up. "You'll never be Magic Johnson," she said to Larry, her voice carrying a certainty that made several heads turn. "And you know what? That's probably the best thing about you." The diner grew quiet, the usual breakfast clatter fading into background noise. Larry looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Magic's got his style," she continued, her voice softer now. "But from what I've seen, you've got something different, something that comes from proving people wrong, from working when nobody's watching. My son says you make everyone around you better, and that's worth more than all the flash in the world." Larry sat there for a moment, his coffee untouched, studying her with those intense eyes. Then slowly, a small smile formed on his face. "Your son sounds like he knows his basketball." "He knows what matters," Beverly replied, "and so do you, I think." The rest of his meal passed in comfortable silence. Beverly attended to her other tables, but she couldn't help noticing how he ate methodically, focused and deliberate, like everything else about him. When he finished, he left quietly, nodding to her as he headed for the door. It wasn't until later, when she cleared his table, that she found the tip he'd left. Under his coffee cup was a folded note wrapped around several bills. The amount was generous, more than generous, but it was the note that made her hands tremble slightly as she read it. "Thank you for seeing what others don't. Your son's right about court vision. Sometimes the best plays are the ones nobody expects. Keep watching the game. Larry Bird." The money would help with her son's college fund, but it was the words that Beverly would treasure more. They were a reminder that sometimes the quiet ones, the ones who work in silence and prove themselves through persistence rather than flash, are the ones who end up changing the game. That evening, as she recounted the story to her son, she watched his eyes light up with the same quiet determination she had seen in Larry's face. "Mom," he said, clutching his basketball, "tell me again what you said to him about being different from Magic." And so she did, remembering how sometimes the most powerful moments come not from grand gestures or spectacular plays, but from simple truths spoken in quiet diners on ordinary mornings. She told him about the importance of being yourself, about how greatness doesn't always announce itself with fanfare, and about how sometimes the best way to prove yourself is to keep working when nobody else believes in you. In the years that followed, as Larry Bird's career blossomed and his rivalry with Magic Johnson became the stuff of legend, Beverly would sometimes catch glimpses of him on TV. She would see that same quiet determination, that same focus that she had witnessed in her diner, now playing out on basketball's biggest stage. And every time she saw him make one of those impossible passes, every time she watched him make his teammates better, she would smile, remembering the morning when she had told him he would never be Magic Johnson. Because she had been right. He never tried to be Magic. Instead, he became Larry Bird, and that turned out to be more than enough. The story spread through the diner over the years, growing and changing with each telling, but Beverly kept the note, tucked away in a small box where she kept her most precious memories. It reminded her that sometimes the greatest acts of kindness come not from the grand gestures, but from the simple acknowledgement of seeing someone for who they truly are. And when her son finally made it to college, playing basketball on a scholarship he had earned through years of quiet determination, she would sometimes share the story with his teammates. She would tell them about the morning when Larry Bird sat in her diner, about how true greatness often comes disguised in simple packaging, and about how sometimes the best way to make your mark on the world is to be unapologetically yourself. Diner still stands today, and though the faces have changed and the menus have been updated, there's still something special about Table 7. Maybe it's just a story now, a piece of basketball folklore that lives on in the memories of those who were there. But for Beverly Davis, it remains a reminder that on any given morning, in any given place, magic can happen. Not the flashy, spectacular kind, but the quiet, transformative kind that changes lives one small moment at a time. Years later, when asked about that morning, Beverly would always say the same thing. I told him he'd never be Magic Johnson, and he proved me right. He became something better. He became himself. And in the end, that's what made all the difference. The story of that morning at Murphy's Diner became more than just a tale about a basketball player and a waitress. It became a testament to the power of authenticity, to the importance of seeing people for who they are rather than who others want them to be. It became a reminder that sometimes the greatest compliment you can give someone is to acknowledge their uniqueness rather than comparing them to others. Beverly kept working at the diner for many more years, serving countless customers and sharing countless stories, but none quite matched the morning when she told Larry Bird he'd never be Magic Johnson, and he left her a tip that showed he understood exactly what she meant. The legacy of that morning lives on not just in the story itself, but in the countless people who heard it and found the courage to embrace their own path, to work in silence, to prove themselves through persistence rather than flash. It lives on in every quiet moment of determination, in every instance where someone chooses to be themselves rather than trying to be someone else. And perhaps that's the real magic of the story. Not that it happened to involve a future basketball legend, but that it reminds us all that greatness comes in many forms, and the most powerful kind often arrives without fanfare, in the quiet moments when someone sees us for who we truly are. For Beverly Davis, that morning in 1979 became more than just another shift at Murphy's Diner. It became a moment that reminded her, and countless others through the years, that sometimes the best thing you can be is exactly who you are. The story didn't end there, though. As the weeks turned into months, Beverly noticed subtle changes in the diner's atmosphere. Word had spread about Larry Bird's visit, and Table 7 took on an almost mythical status among the regulars. Young basketball players from the neighborhood would request that specific table, hoping some of that magic might rub off on their own dreams. Lisa Wallace, another waitress who had been skeptical of Beverly's story at first, became one of its most passionate tellers. "You should have seen it," she would say to new customers, her voice filled with a reverence that grew with each retelling. Beverly just stood there and told him the truth straight up. No sugarcoating, no flattery, just the honest truth about being yourself. The impact rippled beyond the diner's walls. Beverly's son, inspired by that morning's events, began approaching his own basketball career differently. Instead of trying to copy the flashy moves he saw on TV, he focused on developing his own style. His high school coach, Andrew Pierce, noticed the change. "Your boy's different now," he told Beverly during one of his regular breakfast visits. "He stopped trying to be like everyone else and started playing his own game. That's rare in someone his age." The note Larry had left became something of a talisman for Beverly. On difficult days, when the weight of single motherhood and endless shifts seemed overwhelming, she would take it out and read those words again. "Thank you for seeing what others don't." It reminded her that sometimes the greatest strength lies in recognizing and embracing what makes us different. As Larry Bird's career took off, the diner became an unofficial gathering spot for basketball fans during big games. The regulars would crowd around the small TV mounted in the corner, and Beverly would find herself watching not just the game, but the faces of those watching. She saw how they reacted to Bird's style of play, not as flashy as Magic's, but just as effective in its own way. Chad Lamb, a local sports writer who became a regular after hearing about the famous encounter, wrote a column about it for the Boston Herald. "In a city known for its sports legends," he wrote, "sometimes the most meaningful moments happen not on the court, but in the quiet corners of neighborhood diners, where wisdom is served alongside coffee and toast." The article brought new customers to Murphy's, each hoping to hear the story firsthand from Beverly. She told it countless times, but never exactly the same way twice. Each telling seemed to reveal new layers, new insights about authenticity and the courage to be different. One morning, about a year after Bird's visit, a young player from the local high school basketball team came in looking dejected. Beverly recognized him as David Smith, a talented but struggling player who had been benched for trying too hard to play like others instead of developing his own style. "I heard about what you said to Larry Bird," he said, sliding into a booth. "About never being Magic Johnson. Do you think maybe you could tell me that story?" Beverly sat down across from him, her order pad forgotten for a moment. "Let me tell you something about that morning," she began. And as she spoke, she could see something changing in the young man's eyes, the same kind of quiet determination she had seen in Larry Bird's face that day. The diner itself seemed to absorb these moments, these conversations about authenticity and self-discovery. The worn vinyl booths and slightly scratched countertops became witnesses to countless similar exchanges. Beverly watched as her simple words to Larry Bird evolved into a kind of philosophy that resonated far beyond basketball. John McCarthy, a local business owner who had been present that morning, often reflected on how that moment had influenced his own approach to competition. "It's not about being better than someone else," he would say, nursing his morning coffee. "It's about being the best version of yourself." The impact of that morning extended even to Beverly's approach to her own life. She had always been good at her job, but now she brought a different kind of presence to it. She became known not just for her efficient service, but for her ability to really see people, to recognize and acknowledge their unique qualities. Catherine McGrath, a regular who had been struggling with her own career decisions, once told, "Beverly, you know that story about Larry Bird? It's not really about basketball at all, is it? It's about having the courage to be yourself in a world that's always trying to make you be something else." Beverly hadn't thought about it that way, but Catherine was right. The story had taken on a life of its own, becoming a parable about authenticity in a world obsessed with comparison. It wasn't just about a basketball player and a waitress anymore. It was about the moment when someone recognizes and validates your right to be uniquely yourself. As the years passed, Beverly watched the rivalry between Bird and Magic Johnson unfold on the national stage. She saw how their different styles complemented each other, how their contrasts made the game richer and more exciting. Each time Bird made one of his signature plays, not flashy but brilliant in its own way, she felt a quiet pride in having recognized that quality in him before the rest of the world did. The diner became a kind of sanctuary for those who needed to hear this message. College players struggling with the pressure to conform to a certain style, business people trying to find their own path in competitive industries, young artists, musicians, and dreamers of all kinds, each carrying their own version of the same challenge, the courage to be authentically themselves. Robin Baker, an art student who waited tables part-time at Murphy's, once asked Beverly if she had been nervous, speaking so boldly to someone who would become such a legendary figure. "Nervous?" Beverly laughed. "No, honey. When you're speaking the truth, the real truth that comes from seeing someone clearly, there's no reason to be nervous. That's the thing about authenticity. It recognizes itself." The story became part of Murphy's diner's identity, woven into its fabric as surely as the smell of coffee and the sound of the bell above the door. But more than that, it became a reminder of how a single moment of genuine recognition can ripple outward, touching lives in ways we never expect. Beverly kept working at Murphy's well into the 1990s, long enough to see Bird's entire career unfold, to watch him become exactly who she had known he could be, not a copy of someone else, but uniquely, powerfully himself. She saw how his style of play influenced a new generation of players who learned that greatness doesn't have to look the same for everyone. The note remained in its special place, the paper growing soft with age, but the words as powerful as ever. Sometimes, on quiet mornings when the diner was just opening, Beverly would take it out and remember that day. She would think about all the lives that had been touched by that simple moment of truth, all the people who had found courage in the story of a waitress who told a future legend to be himself. And in those moments, she understood that sometimes the greatest acts of kindness are simply those moments when we see people clearly and have the courage to tell them what we see. That morning in 1979 hadn't just been about a tip that left her speechless. It had been about the power of recognition, the importance of authenticity, and the quiet magic that happens when someone believes in you enough to tell you the truth. The legacy of that morning lives on in Murphy's diner, in the stories told over countless cups of coffee, in the dreams nurtured at table 7, and in the simple truth that Beverly Davis shared with Larry Bird, that the best thing you can be, the only thing you should try to be, is yourself. Because sometimes that's more than enough. It's everything. The year was 1980. And Murphy's Diner had become more than just another eatery in Boston. The morning rush still brought the familiar symphony of clinking coffee cups and sizzling griddles, but there was something different in the air, a sense of possibility that hadn't existed before that fateful morning with Larry Bird. Beverly Davis stood behind the counter, watching the early morning light filter through the slightly dusty windows. She had been keeping a scrapbook, tracking Larry Bird's rookie season with the Celtics. Each newspaper clipping, every magazine article seemed to confirm what she had seen in him that morning. A different kind of greatness, one that didn't need to announce itself with flair and flash. "You wouldn't believe what he did last night," said Eric Carrillo, a regular who had taken to bringing in sports pages to share with Beverly. Fourth quarter, game on the line, and instead of taking the shot himself, he makes this impossible. A pass to a teammate. Nobody saw it coming. Nobody except the guy he passed to. Beverly smiled, remembering Bird's quiet focus that morning in the diner. "That's his gift," she said, refilling Eric's coffee. "He sees things others don't, and he makes everyone around him better for it." The diner had become something of a sanctuary for basketball enthusiasts, particularly young players trying to find their way in the game. Table 7, where Bird had sat, had become known as the lucky table, though Beverly knew luck had nothing to do with what happened there. Mary Reed, another waitress who had recently started working at Murphy's, was fascinated by how many people came in asking to hear the story. "Tell me again," she would say during quiet moments, "about how you knew he was different." "I didn't know," Beverly would reply, straightening menus or wiping down counters as she spoke. "I just saw who he was, not who everyone wanted him to be. Sometimes that's all people need, someone to see them clearly." The impact of that morning had spread far beyond the diner's walls. Beverly's son, now playing college basketball, had written about it in his application essay. "My mum taught me the most important lesson about basketball," he wrote, "and it had nothing to do with dribbling or shooting. She taught me that the greatest players aren't the ones who try to be like someone else. They're the ones who perfect being themselves." One morning, as Beverly was setting up for the day, she found Andrew Liu waiting outside the diner before opening. He was a local high school basketball coach who had been struggling with one of his players, a talented but frustrated young man who kept trying to emulate Magic Johnson's style instead of developing his own. "I need your help, Beverly," Andrew said, settling into his usual spot at the counter. "I need you to tell him what you told Bird. Maybe coming from you, it'll mean something." Beverly thought about it as she started the first pot of coffee brewing. "Bring him in," she said finally, "but not because of what I said to Larry Bird. Bring him in because he needs to hear what I see in him." The next day, Andrew brought in his player, Michael Washington, a lanky teenager with quick hands and uncertain eyes. Beverly watched as he slid into the booth at table 7, his shoulders hunched as if trying to make himself smaller. "So, Coach says you're having a hard time finding your game," Beverly said, setting down a plate of pancakes she hadn't charged to anyone's tab. "Want to tell me about it?" Michael picked at his food, eyes downcast. Everyone keeps saying, I need to be more exciting, more like magic, but when I try, it all falls apart." Beverly sat down across from him, her order pad forgotten in her apron pocket. "Let me tell you something about the morning Larry Bird sat right where you're sitting. Now, I told him he'd never be Magic Johnson, and you know what? I meant it as the highest compliment I could give." She spent the next hour with Michael, sharing not just the story of Bird's visit, but her observations about what made great players great. It wasn't about copying someone else's style, she explained. It was about finding your own voice on the court, your own way of seeing the game. The conversation with Michael became another thread in the tapestry of stories that made up the diner's legacy. A few weeks later, Andrew came in beaming. "Whatever you said to him," he announced, "it worked. He's playing his game now, not trying to be someone else. We're winning games we had no business winning." The diner's reputation grew, attracting more than just basketball players. Bianca Andrews, a young musician struggling with comparisons to more famous performers, became a regular after hearing about Beverly's wisdom. "Everyone keeps telling me I need to sound more like the popular artists," she confided one quiet afternoon. "But when I try, it feels wrong, like I'm wearing someone else's clothes." Beverly nodded, understanding. "That's because you're trying to sing their song instead of your own. The world doesn't need another copy of someone else. It needs your unique voice." The lessons from that morning with Larry Bird seemed to apply to every field, every endeavor. Beverly found herself sharing the story not just as a tale about basketball, but as a parable about authenticity and self-discovery. Paul Hansen, who had been one of the regulars discussing Magic Johnson that fateful morning, became one of the story's most ardent supporters. "I was wrong," he would tell anyone who would listen. "I thought basketball was all about flash and excitement, but Bird showed us there's more than one way to be great." The diner itself seemed to absorb these lessons, becoming a place where people came not just for food, but for permission to be themselves. The worn booths and scratched tables held countless conversations about dreams, doubts, and the courage to follow your own path. One morning, Beverly found a letter waiting for her at the diner. It was from a former customer, Lisa Quinn, who had moved away years ago. "I never told you this," the letter read, "but that story you told me about Larry Bird, it changed my life. I was always trying to fit into someone else's mold, but hearing about how you encouraged him to be himself, it gave me the courage to start my own business, to do things my way." The letter joined Larry's note in Beverly's special box, another reminder of how a single moment of truth could ripple outward, touching lives in unexpected ways. As the months passed, Beverly watched Bird's first season unfold, saw him transform. The Celtics, not by being flashy or spectacular, but by being precisely who he was, a player who made everyone around him better. She kept every newspaper clipping, every magazine article that proved what she had seen in him that morning. Timothy Snow, a sports writer who had become a regular, once asked her if she ever regretted not asking for Bird's autograph. Beverly just smiled and patted her apron pocket where she kept his note. "I got something better," she said. "I got to see him become exactly who he was meant to be." The diner's morning regulars had developed a routine of discussing the previous night's games, but the conversations had changed. Instead of just talking about scores and statistics, they talked about style, about the different ways players could impact a game. Cynthia Guzman, a college basketball referee who often stopped in for breakfast, noted how Bird's influence was changing the way young players approached the game. "They're starting to understand," she said one morning, "that greatness doesn't have to look the same for everyone." Beverly's son, watching from college, called home after every Celtics game. "Mom," he would say, excitement in his voice. You see how Bird did exactly what you said? He's not trying to be magic, he's just being himself, and it's changing everything." The story of that morning became part of Boston's basketball folklore, passed around like a treasured family recipe. But for Beverly, it remained intensely personal, a reminder of the power of seeing people for who they truly are. One quiet Sunday morning, almost a year after Bird's visit, Beverly arrived at the diner to find a small package waiting for her. Inside was a Celtics jersey, number 33, with a simple note: "Still making everyone around me better. Thank you for showing me why that matters. Larry Bird." The jersey found a place of honor on the diner's wall, not just as a piece of sports memorabilia, but as a symbol of what could happen when someone was encouraged to be authentically themselves. Robin Baker, the part-time waitress, who had been skeptical of the story at first, watched customers' reactions to the jersey. "It's funny," she said one day, "how many people come in thinking it's just about basketball, but leave understanding it's about something much bigger." The diner became known as a place where dreams were nurtured and authenticity was celebrated. Table 7 remained special, not because a future Hall of Famer had sat there, but because it represented a moment when someone had been seen for who they truly were. Beverly continued to serve coffee and wisdom in equal measure, watching as Bird's career unfolded exactly as she had imagined it would, not in Magic's shadow, but alongside him, each player bringing their own unique brilliance to the game. The morning rush still brought its familiar chaos, but now there was something else too, a sense that within these walls, people could find the courage to be themselves, to trust their own way of doing things, to believe that their unique contribution to the world mattered. And on quiet mornings, when the sun was just beginning to paint the diner's windows with golden light, Beverly would sometimes sit at table 7, remembering the young man who had sat there that morning in 1979. She would think about how a simple moment of truth had created ripples that continued to touch lives, and she would smile, knowing that sometimes the greatest gift we can give another person is the courage to be exactly who they are. The story of Larry Bird and the waitress who told him to be himself became more than just a tale about basketball. It became a reminder that greatness comes in many forms, and that the most powerful form of recognition is seeing and acknowledging the unique potential in each person we meet. For Beverly Davis, that morning in 1979 had been more than just another shift at Murphy's Diner. It had been a moment of truth that showed her, and countless others, that sometimes the best way to help someone soar is to give them permission to use their own wings. The legacy of that morning lives on, not just in the jersey on the wall or the stories told over countless cups of coffee, but in the quiet courage of everyone who has heard the tale and found in it the strength to be themselves. Because and that's what the story was really about. Not just a basketball player who became a legend, but the universal truth that the greatest gift we can give ourselves, or anyone else, is the permission to be authentically, unapologetically who we are meant to be. The winter of 1981 brought more than just cold winds to Boston. It brought a sense of destiny fulfilled as Larry Bird's Celtics surged through the NBA season. At Murphy's Diner, Beverly Davis watched it all unfold with a quiet pride that went beyond simple fandom. She had become something of a local legend. Herself, the waitress who had seen Bird's greatness before anyone else, Isaiah Allen, a sports columnist for the local paper, had started making Murphy's his second office. "There's something special happening here," he told Beverly one morning, his notebook open beside his coffee cup. "It's not just about Bird anymore. It's about what you started that morning." The diner had evolved into something more than just a place to grab breakfast. It had become a sanctuary for dreamers, a place where being different wasn't just accepted, it was celebrated. Jack Fisher, a local high school basketball coach, made it a point to bring his players in regularly. Not just for the food, but for the atmosphere of authenticity that seemed to permeate the very walls. "You see that jersey on the wall?" he would tell his team, pointing to Bird's number 33. "That's not just about basketball. That's about having the courage to be yourself when everyone else wants you to be something different." Beverly had kept every newspaper clipping, every magazine article about Bird's success. But more importantly, she had started keeping a different kind of record. Stories of people whose lives had been touched by what had happened that morning in 1979. Catherine Morrow, a young artist who worked the morning shift with Beverly, had started sketching customers who came in seeking their own moment of truth at table 7. "Each one has a story," she would say, her pencil moving swiftly across her sketch pad during quiet moments. "Each one is looking for permission to be themselves." The diner's reputation had spread beyond the local basketball community. Deborah Kelly, a business consultant who had overheard the story during a breakfast meeting, began bringing her clients in. "Sometimes," she explained to Beverly, "people need to hear your story before they can understand why their business isn't working. They're too busy trying to be the next big thing instead of being themselves." One particularly cold morning, Eric Horn, a jazz musician struggling to find his voice in a world of imitators, sat at table 7 for hours, nursing a single cup of coffee. Beverly watched him, remembering another quiet soul who had sat in that same spot, carrying his own doubts and determinations. "You know," she said, sliding into the booth across from him, "Larry Bird didn't become great by playing like Magic Johnson. He became great by playing like Larry Bird." Eric looked up, his fingers tapping an unconscious rhythm on the tabletop. "But everyone keeps saying I need to sound more like Miles Davis, more like John Coltrane. And how's that working out for you?" Beverly asked, her voice gentle but firm. The conversation that followed became another chapter in the diner's growing legacy. A month later, Eric returned with his first album, recorded with his own unique style. "I stopped trying to be them," he said, sliding a copy across the table to Beverly. "Started being me instead." The impact of that morning in 1979 continued to ripple outward in unexpected ways. Mary Ruiz, a teacher at the local high school, began bringing her students in for what she called authenticity sessions. They would sit at different tables, sharing their dreams and fears, while Beverly moved among them, sharing not just coffee and pie, but wisdom about the courage to be oneself. "It's not just about sports," Mary would tell her colleagues. "It's about helping these kids understand that they don't have to fit into someone else's mold to be successful." The diner's walls had begun to tell their own story. Alongside Bird's jersey hung photographs and newspaper clippings, not just of his achievements, but of local success stories, people who had found their own path after hearing Beverly's story. Patrick Gibson, a former college player who had given up on basketball after trying too hard to emulate others, became a regular visitor. He had started coaching youth leagues, teaching kids the importance of developing their own style. "I tell them about this diner," he would say, "about a waitress who understood that greatness comes in many forms." Beverly's son, now finishing college, had written his thesis on the psychology of athletic development, using the story of that morning as his central case study. "My mother's interaction with Larry Bird," he wrote, "demonstrates how a single moment of authentic recognition can alter not just an individual's trajectory, but the very way we think about success and identity." The morning rush at Murphy's had taken on an almost ceremonial quality, Regulars knew to pause their conversations when new customers asked about the jersey on the wall, letting Beverly tell the story in her own way. She never told it quite the same way twice, but the essence remained constant, the importance of being true to oneself. David Smith, the young player who had been struggling with his game, had gone on to earn a college scholarship. He sent Beverly a letter from his dorm room. "Every time I step on the court," he wrote, "I remember what you said about Bird. I'm not trying to be anyone else anymore. I'm just trying to be the best version of myself." The diner's guest book, started by Lisa Wallace to keep track of all the visitors who came because of the Bird story, had filled up with messages of gratitude and inspiration. "Thank you for helping me find my own way," wrote one. "Your words about Bird helped me understand why my business wasn't working," wrote another. Even the other waitresses had been transformed by the diner's special atmosphere. Robin Baker, once skeptical of the story's significance, had become one of its most passionate advocates. "Working here," she would say, "you learn that every person who walks through that door is carrying their own version of that morning's struggle, the fight between who they are and who they think they should be." The winter of 1981 saw the Celtics soaring, with Bird playing the game in his uniquely effective way. Beverly watched every game she could, seeing in each play the same qualities she had recognized that morning: the court vision, the ability to make others better, the courage to be different. Chad Price, a sports psychologist who had heard about the diner's story, began conducting informal research on what he called the Murphy's effect, the way authentic recognition of someone's unique qualities could transform their performance and sense of self. What happened here, he told Beverly during one of his many visits, wasn't just about basketball. It was about human potential, about what happens when someone is seen and appreciated for who they truly are. The diner had become a kind of pilgrimage site for people seeking their own moment of truth. Some came for the story, others for the atmosphere, but all found something of value in the simple wisdom that had been shared that morning in 1979. Cynthia Jackson, a corporate trainer, began using the story in her workshops about authentic leadership. "It's not about trying to copy successful people," she would tell her participants. "It's about understanding what makes you uniquely valuable." Beverly kept Larry's original note in a frame behind the counter, not as a piece of memorabilia, but as a reminder of the power of authentic recognition. "Thank you for seeing what others don't," it read, words that had become a kind of motto for the diner. The regulars had developed their own traditions around Table 7. They would leave notes of encouragement for the next person who might sit there, sharing their own stories of finding the courage to be themselves. Andrew Pierce, a local minister, began referring to Murphy's as the authenticity diner in his sermons. "There's a place in our city," he would say, "where people go not just to be fed, but to be seen for who they truly are." As 1981 drew to a close, Beverly found herself reflecting on how far things had come from that morning when she had told Larry Bird he would never be Magic Johnson. The diner had become more than just a restaurant. It had become a testament to the power of authentic recognition, a place where people could find the courage to be themselves. The story had evolved beyond its original context, touching lives in ways Beverly could never have imagined. It had become a parable about authenticity, a reminder that sometimes the greatest gift we can give another person is the recognition of their unique value. John Nelson, a business owner who had struggled with comparing himself to his competitors, accredited the diner's atmosphere with helping him find his own path to success. "I realized," he said, "that I didn't need to be the next big thing. I just needed to be the best version of myself." The impact continued to spread, creating a ripple effect that touched lives far beyond the diner's walls. Beverly watched it, all with a mixture of amazement and quiet satisfaction, understanding that what had happened that morning had been about much more than just a conversation with a future basketball star. As the new year approached, Murphy's Diner stood as a beacon of authenticity in a world that often seemed to value conformity over individuality. The worn booths and scratched tables had become witnesses to countless moments of self-discovery, each one adding to the rich tapestry of stories that made the place special. Beverly Davis continued to serve coffee and wisdom with equal measure, knowing that each day brought new opportunities to help someone find their own path, just as she had helped Larry Bird confirm his that morning in 1979. The legacy of that morning lived on, not just in the jersey on the wall or the stories told, over countless cups of coffee, but in the lives of all those who had found the courage to be themselves within these walls. Because in the end, that's what the story was really about. The transformative power of being seen and accepted for exactly who you are. As the 1982 NBA Finals approached, Murphy's Diner hummed with an energy that went far beyond basketball. The worn linoleum floors had carried thousands of footsteps since that fateful morning in 1979, each seeking something more than just a meal. Beverly Davis stood behind the counter, watching the morning light filter through windows that had witnessed countless transformations. "You changed something that morning?" Sarah Rose said, wiping down the counter during a quiet moment, not just for Larry Bird, but for all of us. Sarah had started as a customer, drawn in by the story, and had eventually become part of the Diner's family, understanding that serving coffee here meant serving something deeper: hope, recognition, permission to be oneself. The Diner's guest book had grown into multiple volumes, each page filled with stories of transformation. Michael Wright, a businessman who'd been struggling with industry pressure to conform, had written, "I came for breakfast, but I found my future. Thank you for teaching me that success doesn't mean becoming someone else." Beverly kept each book carefully preserved, understanding that they contained more than just signatures. They held the chronicles of countless souls who had found their way back to themselves within these walls. Jennifer Bell, a sports journalist who had become a regular, was working on a feature about the intersection of sports and personal authenticity. "What happened here," she told Beverly one morning, "wasn't just about basketball. It was about someone having the courage to tell a simple truth that everyone else was afraid to say." The Diner had become known as a place where truth could be spoken and heard. Table 7, where Larry Bird had sat, remained special, but the magic had spread throughout the establishment. Each booth held its own stories of revelation and return to authenticity. Aaron Sanders, a local theater director, had started holding auditions at the Diner. "There's something about this place," he explained. "People are more themselves here. They stop trying to be what they think I want and start showing me who they really are." The morning regulars had developed their own rituals. Paul Hansen, who had been present that first morning with Bird, would bring in new customers and sit quietly while Beverly told the story. "Watch their faces," he would say afterward. "You can see the moment they understand it's not about Bird. It's about them." Beverly's collection of newspaper clippings about Bird had grown, but more precious were the letters she received from people whose lives had been touched by the Diner's message. Lacey Orozco, a teacher from California, had written, "I tell your story to my students every year, not because it's about a famous basketball player, but because it's about the courage to be yourself in a world that often wants you to be someone else." The Diner's walls had become a gallery of transformation. Alongside Bird's jersey hung photographs and notes from people who had found their path after hearing the story. Each one represented a moment when someone had chosen authenticity over imitation. Timothy Roth, a business consultant who had struggled with helping clients find their unique market position, began holding his initial client meetings at Murphy's. Sometimes, he said, people need to hear Beverly's story before they can understand why their business isn't working. They're too busy trying to be the next Amazon or Apple instead of being themselves. The impact had spread far beyond sports. Kyle Arnold, a musician who had been fighting to find his own sound, credited his breakthrough album to a conversation at Table 7. Beverly asked me why I was trying so hard to sound like everyone else when my own voice was right there, waiting to be heard. Even the way Beverly approached her work had evolved. She had always been a good waitress, but now she understood that her real job was seeing people, really seeing them, the way she had seen Larry Bird that morning. Robert Simpson, a regular, who worked in human resources, observed this transformation. "You've created something remarkable here," he told her. "A place where people can come to remember who they are." The diner's morning rush had become a kind of informal gathering of seekers and finders. People would linger over coffee, sharing their stories of struggle and discovery. Beverly moved among them, not just serving food, but offering the gift of recognition she had given Bird that morning. Angel Martinez, a young basketball player who had been ready to quit the game, found new purpose after hearing Beverly's story. "I was trying so hard to play like everyone else," he said. "I forgot that my different way of seeing the court could be my strength." The impact rippled through generations. Beverly's son, now coaching basketball himself, brought his players to the diner regularly. "I tell them it's not about being the next Larry Bird or Magic Johnson," he would say. "It's about being the first you." Mary Reed, who had been skeptical of the story's significance when she first started working at the diner, had become one of its most passionate advocates. "Every day," she said, "I watch people walk in carrying the weight of others' expectations and walk out standing taller, lighter, more themselves." The diner had become a kind of pilgrimage site for those seeking their own moment of truth. People came from across the country, drawn by word of mouth and the promise of finding something they had lost, their own authentic voice. Beverly kept Larry's note in a special place, not because it was from a famous athlete, but because it represented a moment of perfect recognition between two people who understood the value of being oneself. Chad Lamb, who had covered sports for decades, said it best. "What happened here wasn't just about basketball. It was about someone having the courage to see and speak the truth that could set another person free." As the 1982 finals approached, with Bird's Celtics in contention, the diner buzzed with excitement. But it wasn't just about the games. It was about watching someone who had embraced their unique way of playing succeed on their own terms. Beverly would sometimes sit at table 7 during quiet moments, remembering that morning and all that had followed. She thought about how a simple truth, spoken with conviction, had created ripples that continued to touch lives years later. Stephen Richardson, a psychologist who had studied the impact of authentic recognition on personal development, began using the diner's story in his work. "What happened here," he would tell his colleagues, "was a perfect example of how powerful it can be when someone truly sees us for who we are." The diner's coffee might not have been the best in Boston, and the menu was standard fare, but people kept coming back for something that couldn't be measured in cups or plates. The possibility of being seen, truly seen, for who they were. Lisa Wallace, who had worked alongside Beverly for years, understood the magic of the place. "It's not just about telling people they can be themselves," she would say. "It's about creating a space where they can remember who they are." The impact continued to spread in unexpected ways. Bianca Andrews, a teacher who had heard the story, started a program in her school called Your Own Game, helping students find and value their unique approaches to learning. The diner had become more than just a restaurant. It had become a testament to the power of authentic recognition, a place where people could find the courage to be themselves. In a world that often demanded conformity, Beverly watched it all with a mixture of amazement and quiet satisfaction, understanding that what had happened that morning in 1979 had been about much more than just a conversation with a future basketball star. As the years passed, the story evolved, but its essence remained the same, the transformative power of being seen and accepted for exactly who you are. The diner stood as a reminder that sometimes the greatest gift we can give another person is the recognition of their unique value. The legacy lived on in the lives touched, the paths changed, the courage found within these walls. It lived on in every person who walked through the door, carrying the weight of others' expectations, and left standing taller, more themselves. Beverly Davis continued to serve coffee and wisdom with equal measure, knowing that each day brought new opportunities to help someone find their own path, just as she had helped Larry Bird confirm his that morning in 1979. And on quiet mornings, when the sun was just beginning to paint the diner's windows with golden light, she would sometimes sit at table 7, remembering the young man who had sat there that morning. She would think about how a simple moment of truth had created ripples that continued to touch lives, and she would smile, knowing that sometimes the greatest gift we can give another person is the courage to be exactly who they are. The story of Larry Bird and the waitress who told him to be himself became more than just a tale about basketball. It became a reminder that greatness comes in many forms, and that the most powerful form of recognition is seeing and acknowledging the unique potential in each person we meet. As the diner prepared to celebrate its role in Boston's basketball history, Beverly understood that the real celebration wasn't about sports at all. It was about the countless moments of recognition and return to authenticity that had happened within these walls. "You know what I think about sometimes?" she said to Jennifer Bell, who was finishing up her article about the diner. "I think about all the Larry Birds out there, not the basketball players, but the people who are trying so hard to be someone else when their own magic is right there, waiting to be seen." The diner's legacy continued to grow, not in the number of famous visitors or media mentions, but in the quiet transformations that happened every day at its tables. Each person who found the courage to be themselves added another thread to the tapestry of stories that made the place special. And so Murphy's Diner stood, not just as a place where a famous basketball player once had breakfast, but as a testament to the power of authentic recognition and the courage to be oneself. Its worn booths and scratched tables had become witnesses to countless moments of self-discovery, each one adding to the rich legacy of that morning in 1979. Beverly Davis continued to serve coffee and truth in equal measure, understanding that sometimes the most powerful thing we can do for another person is to see them clearly and have the courage to tell them what we see. The story lives on, not just in the jersey on the wall or the stories told over countless cups of coffee, but in the lives of all those who found the courage to be themselves within these walls. Because in the end, that's what the story was really about. Not just a basketball player who became a legend, but the universal truth that the greatest gift we can give ourselves or anyone else is the permission to be authentically, unapologetically who we are meant to be.